All right. So I am super excited to introduce Janelle. Little sounds like some of you guys already know her. I know I do. I know that I do. Um, Janelle is a former three times head of demand gen turned business owner. She founded Elevate Growth to provide demand gen consulting services for B2B SaaS companies. She's passionate about helping marketers turn unscalable tactics into revenue generating playbooks that scale. Janelle,
Yes.
we're super excited to have you. Welcome to Demand Collective, and I'll let you take it away.
Amazing. Thank you so much for everybody being here and joining me. I'm really, really excited. As you guys know, the topic for today is modernizing the go-to-market, but I want to focus on why that's important and if you're currently in that situation, what you should do about it. So first, we're going to start with just a couple of questions. Let's think back to, as marketers, if we were running a lead gen model before or anything that was just a little bit more of just tactical and broken, and you had a lead come in that was the best prospect ever, only to have your prospect just get lost in CRM space. No follow-up happened. Nobody remembered that it went through the system. It wasn't tagged correctly. Like something went wrong somewhere. The next question is, or have you ever had the best prospect ever come to your website and submit one of those forms only to have a salesperson or an SDR come back and ask like a CEO a 12 question qualification checklist that turned the super enthusiastic buyer from level of enthusiasm and totally bought in to just like you add some more friction to that. If your answer to that is yes, unfortunately, I've seen this scenario as a lot more common than uncommon, and I've seen it play out countless times over and over and over again. And as much as us marketers want to point fingers and blame sales for not following up on those leads, or for asking the wrong questions, or for going through a qualification checklist, it's not their fault. We're all trying to do the best that we can in all of our roles, and that's what their task is set up to do, right? The problem is we extract it back. It's not a marketing versus sales problem. The problem is that the company failed to modernize the entire go-to-market motion. They switched to a demand gen strategy without thinking about the implications down funnel. So what are some of the things that affect that when we talk about what a modernized go-to-market motion looks like? Say you switch to a demand gen model and you created this seamless marketing journey and you get that prospect who becomes a fan and actually wants to do business with you. And again, gets their enthusiasm just crushed after going through a long drawn out sales process. And the problem that I have with having the marketing team modernized and not having the sales team modernized or even, customer success at that point is because the company and the sales leaders think that this process is quote unquote proven. And so they kind of stick to their guns and they want to keep this process because it's quote unquote proven. However, I think that that actually poses a really big risk for marketers who went through this long drawn out process of actually gaining buy-in of switching to a demand gen strategy. Everything that you've worked so hard to do will become jeopardized. Oops. Everything that you work so hard to do will become jeopardized. And how this looks from a tactical perspective is that you switch to a demand gen strategy. Everything is seamless. Everything's, quote unquote, beautiful. They hit that point of the sales process and they hit that point of being an opportunity. All of a sudden, the revenue's not coming in. Too much friction. The sales acceleration stages are not actually accelerating any faster or even potentially worse. The leads are falling off very early in the opportunity stages, either from a lack of CRM data, either from a lack of priority, lack of follow-up. There's no real buy-in behind that. And so when that happens, leadership actually pulls the plug and they deem this demand gen strategy ineffective, which leaves marketers where? Back to that lead gen hamster wheel and becoming sales assistants, right? So the journey has got to be consistent all the way through the touch points from marketing and sales and customer success and beyond. Like it's got to be consistent. And that's why I believe that just switching to a demand gen strategy or modernizing marketing just simply isn't enough, because you're going to face these challenges very, very soon if you are not already. So lucky for you, I don't want that. So that's why we're here today. So what's up? Thanks for joining me. I'm Janelle. Brian already gave us a brief introduction over me, but essentially I help B2B SaaS Series A through C companies deploy revenue generating playbooks. And over the last year, I've helped 14 companies successfully develop and deploy demand gen strategies with these go-to-market motions and buy-ins. So I'm really excited for our conversation today. If you're currently in that situation that I just outlined of modernizing marketing and you're currently experiencing those friction points, there are 4 things that I recommend that you do today. And we're going to dive into those really, really quickly because I know we only have like 15 minutes. So the first thing on this list is ask. First and foremost, people don't know what they don't know. So at a bare minimum, try and ask for a better way. Ask for a change. Let's start there and then assess the reaction. And sometimes it's just as easy as asking. Unfortunately, most of the time it's not. So therefore, if the first reaction to number 1 of just asking is skepticism or eye rolls, what I recommend, and if anybody knows me super personally, is I like to push limits. So I recommend that you find a buddy on the sales team who has that same desire and has that same sense for change and work together to develop and test a brand new process. From there, iron out the kinks, create a repeatable process, and accumulate some of those results. The third thing is tell others how. If there's one thing that I've learned with working with salespeople is that they are extremely, extremely competitive, and they always want to learn what somebody else is doing, especially if they're doing it better than them. So after you run a few tests, you have your buddy on the sales side and you're backed with results, you can bring your receipts and then tell others how they can also achieve this as well. So you kind of start from the bottom and you finagle your way to the top. The fourth thing is to champion loudly. Once you finagle your way through the top of the sales team, then you bring that over to sales leadership. And then you have them with the receipts, with the sales team actually advocating for this change as well, to then say, listen, there is a better way. Here's everything that we propose. Here's the receipts of what we've done. And then you make it almost like clear as day that there's a better way. And that, especially coming from the internal team upward, has a lot more of the impact for a change of leadership and a change of mindset for this change. So I know that was a lot that we're going through really, really quickly. But I just want to leave you guys with this tip so far. If you're currently in the situation of you've modernized marketing, maybe you've gone through a demand gen strategy, but you're still finding those friction points on the sales side, I don't think that you should let the lack of go-to-market modernization affect the reason why you lose your demand gen buy-in. And so taking these 4 tips to your leadership team and or to your sales team and any other teams internally to kind of work backwards and work your way up is going to help you guys get the success that you need in order to modernize your entire go-to-market motion. So really short presentation, I know, but that's what I have for you all today. Questions? Not all at once, please.
Hey, Janelle, I would love just kind of see an example of what you mean by, I guess, the 4th point about championing and just how you've done that. If you have any tactical explanation or examples of how that's worked in the past, I'd love to see something like that.
Yeah, great question. So I was actually in-house companies a few years ago. I was in-house as head of demand gen, and there was a head of BDR, I believe was his title. And I came in and I was like, listen, marketing's got to change what we're doing, or like, we're not going to hit these revenue goals. Like we're not going to go in this direction. And he was kind of my internal champion. And he was like, listen, I'm all ears. Like, we're not doing what we want to be doing. Like, that's why we hired you. Like, we're trying to get it in a better way. And I was like, hey, what if we start with just us first and we work out how we can actually get this process? So we actually went through bypassing some of the leads inside of Salesforce and just sending it to him directly. Like, we just tagged it and had him implement that process. And then from there, we took those receipts out of Salesforce, and then he did the presentation to his BDR team on how they could do that follow-up process better. Got that to champion forward. We brought that to the AE team, and they were like, hey, listen, like, if I could take the quality demos over you guys having to go through that qualification checklist, like, most of the time AEs are like, yes, like I would love to have those conversations. But a lot of times it's the leadership kind of pushing downward of like, this is the process. That was the situation for us. So when we championed that over again from the bottom up over to the AE side, they were like, absolutely, let's try it. Right. And so then we kind of got that process going. And I believe before we actually got it to the AEs, if I remember correctly, we had the conversation with leadership of like, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's what's going on. We're questioning if these are the right processes for us. Because at the end of the day, how we get the lead to an AE is tagged through Salesforce, right? Like, we were using Salesforce. So getting that routing and getting the correct information at the right time for that prompt follow-up was critical. So we had that conversation with leadership right then and there, and our RevOps team then made that change. to try and see how that was working. And so as we got those conversations into the AEs, kind of bypassing that SDR team, the feedback is what we took as like our receipts, just like, hey, this is better. This is working. I like this process. Here's what came out of it before it ever hit like the data points inside of Salesforce. So just hearing that like champion loudly, that's that 4-point, champion it loudly throughout, really got that like that hoorah behind it for us to actually say, we're onto something here, you know, and then that's how we kind of progressed in that direction. I hope that was helpful.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting how many SaaS companies, it seems like you have to know as much about working the system as you have to know about working marketing or anything else. And that's its own skill set. And so you have to kind of discover that as well. But I appreciate that. I like how you just got it. You met early success kind of on your own and then went from there. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that's actually a really great question. I personally recommend any and all marketers who are starting their career to work for like SaaS tech startups, because you get so pulled into so many different ways. Like at one point I've done content, I've done RevOps, I've done PR, I've done like you name it. Like at some point I've done something throughout. So I have been fortunate to have that experience on how the different teams work and can kind of integrate all that with the systems from an admin perspective. Like I've done system migrations, unfortunately. Should I have? Probably not. So I agree, like definitely having that higher level, like how does everything work knowledge is important. But if you don't have that knowledge, I think it starts from just shadowing somebody. Like for example, if you don't have the insights on the sales team, just see if you can kind of shadow their roles, you know, join them on a Zoom link all day long and see what we can do, or, you know, show up at a WeWork all day and just kind of model, you know, what their process is. It's also critical to understand how BDRs and AEs go through their task process in Salesforce or in HubSpot, like what they use to follow up with leads, their process for their reminders, what they actually look for KPIs and for success, like all things that matter to them from a systems perspective is critical for a marketer to know, because you need to tie that in for your reporting, and your, you know, your routing and everything should stem off of that. So absolutely great point.
I have a question for you that's kind of twofold.
Let's do it.
So I kind of fit the bill of exactly the role that you discussed, in the sense that I am the sole growth marketer at a SaaS startup. And I've stepped into a position where we're figuring a lot of things out. I also happen to be not the only champion, but the most vocal champion and the most experienced champion of like the shift to the demand gen machine engine process. And so we're still trying to figure out a lot of the components that are really key to that, with building a content machine and really being able to round out all of those pieces. And so one of the big things that I've been tapped in for is creating resources for the broader org and tying those back into the demand gen motion. So the idea of like going through social selling and training the sales team on the benefits of social selling. And that's a really clear resource that I think that I can make the value clear for. But where one of the areas where I'm stuck is in how to broach that with like customer success. With, you know, it's very easy for me to make the case of like getting folks into the pipeline, into the process, but then on the how can I effectively support and use that to continue to get buy-in for the demand gen motion for the marketing team with all of the other segments of the business, because that's something that's very important to me, and something that like the previous marketing leadership didn't really do a great job of, apparently, and like some of those relationships are a little bit fractured. And then the second part of the question, and then I'll yield my time to you to answer them, is, as you mentioned, it's very commonplace for you to get pulled into all of these things. So how do you manage that in a way that doesn't impact the meaningful parts of your time, or the things where your expertise really shines and your performance is going to be the strongest, in a way where you can still figure out a solution for how to get those things done? So as I said, I'm getting pulled into a lot of these things where I'm looking at these very big picture things. And I come, you know, previously I was a performance marketer. So used to looking very granularly at the platforms and those pieces. So really stepping into this and trying to manage as we figure out these processes as a team and who's owning what and some of those things. I'm happy to advocate for myself to say, like, I can't own all of these things, but there still needs to be a solution. So how, in your experience of navigating that in other roles that you've been in, how did you handle it? What advice do you have? What best practices would you put out there for somebody in that situation?
Great questions. I wrote them to down because I know they're twofold. The first one on going about the relationships that have kind of been fractured in the past and making sure that you need that buy-in, because that's definitely important. Prioritize relationships and address that there's PTSD there, and address how you're advocating for a change, and just have real, raw, hard questions that are needed in order to mend that relationship. And that's going to take more than just one conversation. So normally I recommend either, if whatever cadence works best for you, weekly, bi-weekly, no more than like monthly, stretching it, but just to advocate that you're a partner there. Depending on what your guys's like goals are and, you know, your resources, you can also ask them for a need that they currently have and find a way to fill that ASAP, to kind of prove that, you know, you're walking the walk and not just talking the talk, and really showcasing how you're a partner to them and saying like, hey, listen, I want to be an advocate for you, so here's what I'm going to do in exchange for. I like to take the give, ask approach. So you give, and then at some point when you need something in return, you kind of have that credibility behind you. So I would navigate that. I think relationships are extremely important in order for a strategy to be successful. Moving on to that next thing in terms of like you're the sole marketer, how do you do it all? The reality is you can't. So what you need to do is what I do is I reverse engineer what we should be doing. So you go back and you understand, you know, what those business goals are, what's worked before in the past, what hasn't worked, and then you put together that plan of success. And then you go to either your leadership team, your CSM team, your sales team, whoever the stakeholders are, and you get the buy-in. Normally it takes about 3 revisions of like that strategy for everybody to be like, yes, high five, this is what we're going to be doing. That's what you do moving forward. And if anybody comes back, you say, sorry, we agreed. Sorry, we agreed. In terms of what that strategy looks like and getting that done, don't be afraid to outsource. Like sometimes if you need, like, insource what's important, like keep that stuff in-house, like the social, the content writers, like the personal brands, those things are important stuff. This is a, controversial take, but sometimes you can outsource paid media depending on where your company is and your budgets and, everything. Sometimes it's better to keep that in-house. That's your own personal judgment. But look at where you need the help and where you can afford the help in order to get that done. But look at that first before you sign up for a strategy that you're going to promise, so that you can make sure that you deliver that too. But reverse engineer what the priorities are for everybody, for all the different stakeholders. And then you advocate for that plan and that change. You said you're very vocal, so use your amazing vocal cords and continue preaching that on. And no is a completely professional answer. So if somebody asks you, and just say no, like this is what we agreed on. Hope that helps.
Super helpful as always, Janelle.
I appreciate you. Thanks, Daniel. What else?
Janelle, when you're working with these other teams and you're trying to build alignment and reestablish like these new sort of like operationalize these new functions, how do you build that mutual accountability? Like what sort of, whether it's SLAs, what sort of KPIs within those SLAs, like what things do you look at to make sure each side is meeting their commitment to those changes? And then if one side isn't, how do you address that?
I'm always way more confrontational probably than some people would like, but I like to get alignment and the hard conversations out of the way from the jump. So if we've already agreed about something and it's going south, I'm like, listen, like I'm getting mixed signals from you is my professional answer. We initially agreed upon this, and then now we're going back into the same conversation of, either advocating for change or the business proposals or whatever else they're asking for at that stage. And you just bring it back to, listen, we initially agreed. In terms of operationalizing, like that sense of getting it from the conversation into actually implementation, I like to have KPIs that we hold each other accountable to. And depending on what you're entirely trying to, bring to operationalize, you can have an overlining KPIs of what we're both trying to achieve. And then you can have kind of like your secondary, so primary KPIs, secondary KPIs of what are some of the leading indicators that are going to get us there. And so, for example, if we're talking about modernizing the sales process for that, what are the current fall off rates of, say, opportunity stage 1 to 2, and is that getting any better? What should we ultimately look at? The acceleration between pipeline. That's our leading KPI. What are the stages that are going to get us there? Are we seeing an increase in quality conversations? Is the acceleration between the stages improving? Are they actually the qualified people? Are they getting all the way through quicker and close lossing? Like, you need to think through what that journey looks like and establish those as the KPIs, but define what that primary KPI is, because sometimes some of the secondary ones can fluctuate, right? Depending on how things navigate, how they build out. But as long as we're still following also what I like to call like that North Star, we should be on track in order to seeing that uptick in what we're going after. So determine what those are for you. I guess that's kind of the short answer, and then hold yourself accountable. And no is a completely professional answer. Bring it back to the initial agreed upon conversation.
That's my favorite thing you said today. No is the professional answer. I'm all for it.
Janelle, at the risk of taking more than like the lion's share of your time, I have kind of a question from a different angle. So,
okay.
B2B SaaS Series B company where I work, but with a lot of, so we work in HR tech focused on small businesses. With a lot of companies in this space, we have kind of two different funnels, right? We have mid-market, kind of multi-location, larger deals, and we have what we call self-serve, right? And last year, kind of out of nowhere, we pivoted to basically removing all of the sales assistants from kind of the single location self-serve, even though that's where historically the company had succeeded. So all that to say, we have, this other funnel that we're building for these larger companies, which I think kind of fits more the typical kind of demand gen and ABM play models. But we also have self-serve where, we're not even trying to book demos. We're just trying to book direct signups. And so with that in mind, obviously there's things like CRO, there's a ton of stuff that we can just focus on. But one, do you have any experience kind of in that arena? And do you have any playbooks that just have done well when you don't have a sales team to work with, or you're just kind of trying to get conversions on your site then and there? So, and if that's too big of a question, I totally understand what we have like 1 minute left or something, but
it is a big question, but I think the initial answer is identify what you want that journey to be, and then make sure that you as the marketing team puts that in place. So if you're doing the self-service sign up, you have to have a very strong onboarding process. You also have to have a very strong like upselling process. Like, what's that next step? You have to determine if it's entirely free, if it's limitations of features, if it's a limitation of users, like at what point do you need them to kind of pay for that upgrade, or if it's free indefinitely, right? Like, you need to map out what that journey looks like from the initial point of sign up all the way through. And if you don't have sales supports, like, you need to create those additional touch points to get them to that next point. Like, if it is for them, if they have a number of users, if they reach that max, then what that next step is. Like, if that's your KPI goal, then again, reverse engineer what that looks like to get them there. In terms of like some of the playbooks that has worked from that is identifying who that actual like buying committee is for that. HR is really complicated because most of the time they don't have a lot of the pockets. They don't have a lot of the budget. There's somebody else in line that owns the dollars but has no clue what the platform does. So you need to make sure you're attracting the right person that can, one, buy, and then two, also can see the value in that product just from a sign-up perspective. If you're getting signups from people who have absolutely no idea how to perceive the value of your product, that's not going to turn into the KPI of what we're trying to identify. So you need to go back into who your ICP list is and identify who that correct user is. And then, of course, do your audience research on where they consume their content, add your promotions there to get them into that sign-up. See how they're progressing on their own, identify those gaps, and then reverse engineer that process to get them to where you need to go. Does that help answer? Or what other, I see your gears turning a little bit more.
No, I mean that's a really solid answer. I'm going to think about it, and yeah, I have a dozen questions to go from there. But thank you. That's very helpful.
We can take it offline too if I can help in any other way. Like, feel free to message me on LinkedIn, or my email is Janelle@elevate-growth.com if you want to continue the conversation there, or any additional questions from everybody here that we didn't get a chance to get to. I'm happy to continue the conversation with you all. And I can stop sharing so it's a little bit more intimate too. So hi. Sorry, I didn't realize I was still sharing. Too many screens.
Yeah, thank you again for presenting today and answering questions, Janelle. We're super glad to
Thank you
have
for
you.
having me.
For anyone who has additional questions, Janelle is also in the community, so you can access her directly there.
Sure.
She's also on LinkedIn. The slides will be shared after this. So you'll be able to reach her in any of those ways, and feel free to shoot any questions there. The recording will be available. I'm going to try and get it up within 24 hours. So thanks, everyone. And thanks again, Janelle.
Amazing. Thank y'all.
Thank you.